At the height of his political authority, John F. Kennedy occupied a position that straddled two distinct American identities. He was simultaneously the product of inherited wealth and established family expectation and the architect of what his administration deliberately framed as a new frontier of national ambition. Understanding the psychological framework that shaped his leadership requires examining not simply the events of his presidency, but the mental and social architecture that preceded and underpinned it. The weight of a name and the discipline of intellect, the Kennedy family's political ambitions were not accidental. They were the deliberate project of Joseph Kennedy Sr., who conceived of his children as instruments of a dynastic strategy intended to inscribe the Kennedy name into American political history. The primary vehicle for that ambition was his eldest son, Joseph Jr., systematically prepared from early age for a presidential candidacy. Joe Jr.'s death in a military aircraft explosion over England during the Second World War transferred that obligation onto his younger brother John, an inheritance that JFK accepted not as an actively sought calling but as a responsibility placed upon him by family history and circumstance. His stewardship of the family's political legacy was characterized by a strategy consistent with the dynastic logic of established American wealth. The appointment of Robert F. Kennedy as Attorney General placed a trusted family member at a structural point of institutional influence, a practice both the Roosevelt and Adams families had each employed to extend their generational reach. The deliberate placement of family within high political office was not exclusively nepotism. It was the systematic construction of a durable family presence within democratic institutions. Kennedy's intellectual appointments operated by the same logic of deliberate positioning. His White House, described by contemporaries as Camelot after the legendary court of King Arthur, concentrated academic talent at a density unprecedented in previous administrations. Arthur Schlesinger Jr., a Pulitzer Prize-winning historian, served as a special assistant and contributed directly to the conceptual foundations of Kennedy-era policy. The appointment reflected a consistent belief that governance at the highest level required access to the most rigorous thinking available as an operational resource, not as an ornament. Kennedy's own intellectual output reinforced that positioning. Profiles in Courage, published in 1955 and awarded the Pulitzer Prize for Biography in 1957, engaged seriously with moral courage in political life, examining historical legislators who had acted against constituent interest in defense of what they judged to be correct, and, in doing so, demonstrated a presidential engagement with the complexities of political ethics that was unusual in the literature produced by sitting or aspirant politicians. A Nation of Immigrants addressed the transformative role of migration in the construction of American society, with a prescience repeatedly validated in the decades following his death. These publications were not incidental to his political identity. They were central to it, evidence of a mind that operated on the problem of governance as both practitioner and analyst. His championship of the space program expressed those beliefs at their most rhetorically concentrated. His insistence that the United States commit to a lunar landing by the end of the 1960s, justified explicitly on the grounds that the difficulty of the undertaking was its primary justification rather than an obstacle, communicated a governing value, that the rigorous pursuit of the challenging was a legitimate and necessary purpose for a great nation. Strategic alliance, fashion, and the architecture of presentation, Kennedy's marriage to Jacqueline Bouvier in 1953 operated on multiple levels simultaneously. At the personal level, it was a union between two individuals with genuine shared sensibilities. At the strategic level, it merged two established family networks. Jacqueline came from the Bouvier family, whose standing in East Coast social circles was well established. Her father, John Verneau Bouvier, was a stockbroker and property investor. Her mother, Janet Lee Bouvier, brought additional social connections and prestige. Jacqueline's upbringing in that environment had produced a set of cultural competencies directly applicable to the demands of the First Lady's position. Her command of French was functional rather than decorative, enabling direct engagement with European dignitaries in their own language. Her knowledge of the visual arts informed a White House restoration project that transformed the building from an administrative residence into a deliberate national cultural monument. Her role in promoting American arts and culture during the Kennedy administration was organized and substantive. Her fashion, developed in collaboration with designer Oleg Cassini, produced a wardrobe whose key elements, among them the A-line silhouette, the structured evening gown, and the wool boucle suit, became defining visual references of the early 1960s. The pillbox hat she favored became a symbol whose cultural resonance extended well beyond its fashion origins. Jackie Kennedy occupied a position in the international public imagination that few subsequent figures have replicated with comparable intensity. Kennedy's own wardrobe communicated complementary principles. His Brooks Brothers suits conveyed authority and approachability in a combination that was difficult to achieve and reflected deliberate attention. Clean silhouettes and a restrained palette projected a version of presidential presence that was neither austerely formal nor conspicuously casual. His Ray-Ban Wayfarer sunglasses extended the Kennedy image into popular culture registers without compromising its institutional weight. Together, the Kennedys' visual self-presentation demonstrated a consistent principle that appearance functions as a communicative system, and that the messages it transmits carry significant implications for credibility and authority. Communication, humor, and the management of privacy. Kennedy's facility with humor was among the most strategically valuable of his public assets. His press conferences were distinguished by a wit that was precise, self-aware, and reliably good-natured. On one occasion, responding to press criticism of his father's financial contributions to his campaign, he quoted a fictitious telegram from Joseph Kennedy Sr. instructing him not to buy a single vote more than necessary because he had no intention of paying for a landslide. The remark acknowledged the criticism, diffused it through laughter, demonstrated self-awareness, and reinforced his connection to his audience without diminishing his authority. His vocal delivery amplified the effect. The cadence was measured without becoming labored, and the timbre was warm enough to suggest approachability while remaining grounded enough to convey command. Whether addressing the nation during the Cuban Missile Crisis or conducting routine press exchanges, the tonal register remained consistent, calm, clear, and controlled. His physical presence operated by the same principles. Eye contact was steady and communicative. The gesture was expressive but never excessive. These communicative skills served dual purposes. They projected competence, humanity, and composure outward. They also provided a surface sophisticated enough to shield from view those aspects of his life he had determined to keep private. The extent of those private realities was substantial. Kennedy managed chronic and severe back pain throughout his presidency, requiring regular pharmaceutical intervention and multiple surgeries, including a 1954 procedure that carried significant risk of mortality. He also managed Addison's disease, an endocrine condition requiring continuous treatment. He was rarely photographed using the mobility aids he required privately, consistently presenting a public image of physical vitality materially at variance with his actual condition. A Cold War-era president could not afford to project vulnerability. The gap between private reality and public representation was not accidental, it was managed. His personal life contained additional dimensions subject to equally rigorous containment. Contemporary accounts have documented extramarital relationships during his presidency and alleged peripheral connections to organized crime networks. None found sustained expression in the public record during his lifetime. The management of information was sophisticated enough to prevent disclosure through the most intense press scrutiny of the 20th century. The principle embedded in that management extends beyond its historical context. What a public figure chooses not to disclose shapes their public identity as decisively as what they reveal, and the discipline required to maintain that boundary is itself a form of strategic intelligence. If this examination of the psychological frameworks that shaped Kennedy's leadership has offered a more precise understanding of the relationship between inherited privilege, intellectual investment, and strategic self-presentation, share it with someone who would find that analysis valuable. Hit the like button if this kind of rigorous historical study is what you want more of. Subscribe for further explorations of the individuals whose public lives concealed more sophisticated private architectures than their contemporaries recognized. Leave a comment with the historical figure you believe deserves this quality of analysis applied to their life.